Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, it was another not quite normal week, but I'm dealing. I think a lot of it's just the work that needs to be done for next week's big 500th anniversary episode. But I got a huge amount of that done on Sunday, so I'm in pretty good shape. There's still a bunch of things I got to get done. Plus, I got to record episode 502 on Sunday, so everything needs to be done before that. But anyway, the big downer is that I may be off of running again after just getting back to it after a 4-month layoff, which is dumb to begin with. But I got this sort of hip quad flare up this past week, and it just resulted in absolutely debilitating pain on Saturday. It started to ease on Sunday, and I'm hoping it fades, but I literally couldn't walk, stand, sit, lie down, sleep, or anything else without absolutely immense pain, the kind that just exhausts you. And I'm inclined to think it showed up because I've started running again, even though I was taking it easy, was stretching, doing everything. And at this point, if I have to choose between running and it's repeated but never in the same place injuries, or stick with the weights and yoga routine I've developed in the last few months, I think I'd rather go without the miles, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's the way of all flesh, which is the topic of this week's show. So we're going to get right to it. My guest is Hayley Campbell, who was last on in 2016 during a visit to New York City. This time, she has a brand new book out in the U.S., All the Living and the Dead, From Embalmers to Executioners, an exploration of the people who have made death their life's work, from St. Martin's Press. Came out in the UK this past spring from Raven Books. Same title, different subtitle, though. All the Living and the Dead. It's a fantastic book. It could have been, a dry or even cheeky industry reportage piece about the various people and occupations involved in handling the bodies of the dead and dealing with mass casualty disasters and things. But Hayley does something a lot subtler over the course of this book. She shows us those people and their jobs and their lives, but in the process, she really explores our relationship to death. And I'll just say in the Western world, or in the UK and US, and it's death and grief and what remains of us when we're dead and what remains of us when we're still living. And the book is structured around profiles of people in different lines of what we'll call death work. Funeral director, for example, a guy who handles bodies donated to the Mayo Clinic, a pathology tech, a crime scene cleaner, an embalmer, and a bunch more, including an executioner, which is a decision Hayley made that we'll talk about in the conversation. But she does this incredible job of evoking her subjects' lives and workplaces and what the routine is like when you're doing something that for the rest of us is literally the once in a lifetime thing. And she shows us how these people wound up in these jobs and how they cope with them or don't. But she also explores and undergoes her own transformation over the course of the book. See, the reality of the dead in their physicality and the sensorium of not just the bodies, but the environments around them, the notion that each of these bodies was a life, it begins to work on her. And this I'm not going to spoil it, this key moment occurs when she's witnessing a pathology tech at work. And it sends her into a spiral, which leads to the most touching chapter in the entire piece, which we'll talk about in the conversation. Don't want to spoil it here. But what's key about all this is that it's never maudlin. The book never turns into, as Hayley puts it, a millennial memoir. It never becomes me. But at the same time, her presence and her voice as a writer is strong enough that the reader can sympathize with what she undergoes through the course of the book, and especially that key moment and its fallout for her. And there are no magical answers that come out of this. No, sudden epiphanies and moments where, now this is how we're supposed to understand death going forward. But over the course of the book, we really can come much closer to understanding the reality of it, and that death is something we shouldn't shy away from necessarily, that it can bring us a greater appreciation of the time we have, which sounds cliche, but none of us really live that. And the book brings forth the humanity of the people who we trust with the dead and who we pretend don't exist. As Hayley puts it, they're the invisible people, but they're the ones without whom none of this gets done. They're the people for whom that reality of death is a daily experience, not the out of the ordinary. And her own experience, a sort of road trip through the underworld, really, it helps share that humanity with the reader. It reminds me, back before my current job, I was the editor of a pharmaceutical trade magazine, and I once interviewed an R&D chief at a pharma company. And when I was researching him beforehand, I discovered that his job before moving on to pharma was pediatric oncologist. And I thought about how essential that job is and how soul-crushing it has to be, and how there are moments of great reward if you help a kid and get them through this. But how glad I was that someone had put in years doing it. At the same time, I couldn't imagine that person's spouse at the end of the day asking, how was work today, honey? And it's that sense of the personal that Hayley brings out in her subjects and in herself. And that's what makes this book an absolute treasure. So go buy All the Living and the Dead, out now in the U.S. from St. Martin's Press and in the U.K. from Raven Books. May change your life or, your death. Now here's Hayley's bio. Hayley Campbell is an author, broadcaster, and journalist. Her work has appeared in Wired, The Guardian, New Statesman, Empire, GQ, and more. Her books include All the Living and the Dead and The Art of Neil Gaiman. She lives in London with her cat, Ned. And now, the 2022 Virtual Memories conversation with Hayley Campbell. Tell me where the book started for you, and you chronicle how it changed over the course of the book. But if you can talk about it, largely because for me, reading it, I had this moment where I thought this might have been like a karmic tax write-off when it was starting for you.
What do you mean?
Like when I would beg my parents for money for comics when I was a kid, with the idea that, they'll be valuable someday. And I wasn't sure if this was I searched all these pictures of death when I was a little kid. This will all pay off in the following book. So I didn't know if that was the initial motivation, and then it mutated into what it became. So tell me where I'm wrong and where the book started.
Well, I think you're partially right. So I'm a journalist now, and you will know this, but I basically use my position to I exploit my position to go and ask people whose jobs or whatever I'm interested in, and I really like being shown things that civilians or ordinary people aren't allowed to see. Like, my favorite thing is to go to a museum. I've done it in so many museums in London, even the Natural History Museum. And you go and you ask a curator, what are you interested in and what doesn't fit in the collection that the public is allowed to see? And they always have something amazing in a cupboard. And because of that, I have seen giant squids in a big tank that can't be out in the regular room in the Natural History Museum, simply because the floor isn't strong enough. And also the liquid that it's kept in is so flammable that if something went wrong, it would explode the entire building. And I've touched prehistoric sharks, and I felt the beak of a giant squid that was found inside a whale. And I saw Charles Darwin's pet octopus in a jar, which is just kept in a cupboard out the back of the Natural History Museum. So I have previous in terms of exploiting my position just to go and look at cool stuff. And I've always been interested in death. And I've always had this idea for a book in the back of my head. So I think I pitched it without diving in a sort of therapy way to figure out why it was that I would be doing that. Because I think death has always fascinated me, to a point where I didn't even realize that it was unusual until much later, because I grew up with Eddie Campbell as a dad, and any weirdness is encouraged. You're not made to feel like anything you're interested in is wrong. If you have an interest, good.
What was funny was you mentioned in the introduction how his drawing From Hell, the comic about the Jack the Ripper murders, was the putting those bodies in front of you and kind of laying out that sort of reality. But all I could think about was the Pajama Girl, the Russian adaptation he did with the buried people being having their conversations. My favorite, Little Italy, and thinking, boy, there's a lot of death and after death in Eddie's work, not just From Hell. So yeah, I can sort of see how that permeates.
I know, he balances out with having the immortal gods. But there is a lot of death, and so it was around the house. But I liked the pictures, as I say in the book. I was never horrified by them. I was interested in them, and I don't know if you've seen these pictures, but Dad included some of them in the From Hell companion. So when I was about 7, I sat beside him, and I did what I thought everybody did for a job. And I didn't think my dad was unusual, by the way. I thought everyone's dads were sitting at home drawing pictures like this. And it was only when I went over to my friends' houses and realized that their dads were rarely home, whereas my dad rarely left the house, I thought, something is different here.
I had this with Cullen Murphy, the guy who his father was a Prince Valiant writer and artist, and he lived in this county in Connecticut where all of the cartoonists lived. So it wasn't even just the neighbor. All the neighbors were also men at home with pipes looking out the window and drawing great comic strips.
I love that.
And then he discovered in the bigger world that wasn't how it worked.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I used to think that the word teenagers was when you became a teenager. I don't know where I got this from. When you became a teenager, it was your job to go to a factory and draw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles all day. I thought that's just what you did. So anyway, before that, I sat beside my dad and I just made this book of my own. I called it The Ripper File. And it was this compendium of all the ways a person could die violently. I still have them because he kept them and he would show them off to guests. But there were horrible things in there, people being stabbed to death, witches boiling babies was one of them, and being bashed to death. And I think I'd seen Gorillas in the Mist. So I'd done a picture of somebody being cut up while they were sleeping with a machete. But there are things in there that are just facts. Like there's one where I've drawn a skull and I've written across it, if someone chops your head off and your skin rots, you look like this. Which I think is just true. Yeah.
And it's comics at that point.
Yeah, it's just true. But it was the kind of thing, if I drew it at school, I'd get in trouble. But I drew it at home and I was praised for it. It was kept in a special file and carefully brought across to London with him when he moved. And so now I have it. So yeah, the book started as me just exploiting my position, but it was when I was thinking about why I was a kid like that and why I'm still interested in that I went back and I thought maybe it started here. Maybe it started with these pictures my dad was doing, and how it wasn't odd to me.
And how did it change?
Um,
I mean, what was it like convincing the subjects of what you were trying to do, and then your own discovery that maybe that wasn't what you were trying to do?
Well, I think if you look at my proposal, which no one will ever see, so never will, I read it back when I was finished the book, and it's incredibly naive. The bones are there. My plan was there, but Mike Tyson said everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yep.
And
the von Clausewitz of the ring.
The proposal was just planning, and I had this idea that I would follow the body from, deathbed to burial or cremation, and along the way, it is cared for by several people. And I thought I would speak to the people who did that job. And the reason that the book jumps between the UK and the US is because these people don't really want to talk to journalists, with good reason, because especially here in the UK with tabloids, people don't trust journalists, and I think that's fair. So it took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, because there was a lot of character reference, which was, several people deep. There was a lot of meeting people for interviews that didn't really go anywhere, but they put me in touch with somebody else to get me into these rooms that, like embalming rooms or where the autopsies happen, places where journalists shouldn't be. But I sort of had to prove that I wasn't what they thought I was, and that I was doing something that I thought was quite worthy, because I do think these people who do these jobs are hidden in a way that I don't think is helpful to us. And also they feel kind of forgotten. A lot of the people I spoke to felt like they were doing something that was unappreciated, but even so, they were still going out of their way because they felt it was right, even though no one would notice these little things that they did. And I think it's high time that we did some appreciating, because even during COVID, I don't know if you had it in the States, but we had a thing where I thought it was quite lame to begin with. People would stand on their doorstep and bang pots and clap.
Oh yeah, in New York they were doing that 7:15 every evening, I think.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of nauseating, because we also had this nationwide obsession with this guy called Captain Tom, who was this old guy. He had been a soldier, and he was walking these painfully slow lengths of his garden to raise money for the NHS, and everyone was applauding it, rather than saying, why the fuck isn't the government giving money to the NHS? Why is this up to some old man? But while everyone was praising Captain Tom for doing his garden walks, and everyone was talking about the doctors and the nurses who were all overworked and all of that, I'm still in touch with the people who work in the mortuaries of the hospitals and run funeral homes, and all of them were overwhelmed. And all of them were dealing with new rules of how to do their job, and the things that made their jobs worthwhile, being able to help the family, help the living family, and the very progressive ones who want the living to be more in touch with the dead and help in the dressing of the dead body and be there for all sorts of things. They couldn't do any of that. It became more admin and the movement of a box to another place. And so everyone was feeling like they were failing at the job they wanted to do well. And there were just too many bodies, but nobody was thinking about that. And there was some stories about temporary mortuaries being constructed around the city, but they weren't that wasn't huge news stories. And I found it such a strange absence that all of these thousands of people are dying and it just disappears. It's a number on the news, but we don't see it. And I found it so bizarre. And I was getting messages from these people in my book going, like Lara, who does the autopsies, she was put up in a hotel across the road from the hospital that she works in because she was on call all the time. But none of those people got clapped for.
Yeah. Because it's just the dead at that point.
It's just the dead. And that was another reason I wanted to write this book, because, and I found this again and again when I told people I was doing a book on death. Everybody thought I was writing a book about grief, or they thought I was writing one of those death books, and there are so many of them, where somebody sits in their room thinking big thoughts and quoting Shakespeare again, and really not really adding anything new. And between those books and the grief books, I think there's a body that gets forgotten. And sometimes you do get some great memoirs. Caitlin Doty's Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is a great one. Sue Black's All That Remains is another. But you don't really get a full view of who's there and what happens. And there was one written in the mid-'80s, and I was pissed off when I found it.
Son of a bitch.
I know. Yeah. I was pissed off because I had already had this idea for this book in my head, and I was like, nobody's done exactly that. So that's a good book idea. And I found it, and it's by Michael Lessie, and it's called The Forbidden Zone. And Lessie,
he taught the guy who did Wisconsin Death Trip.
Yes, and
he taught at my college, but I never took a class with him.
Oh wow, okay. And his book is.
There were rumors, but anyway, we'll talk about that off mic.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't heard them. His book is good, but I found it a little male, and there were some bits where I thought, you probably wouldn't transcribe that part of the interview these days because neither of you sounds good. Huh. And so, but I like him as a writer and I like him as a thinker. But in my experience of people who work in the death industry, it's overwhelmingly female. And so I thought 30 years is enough of a gap that I don't look like I'm just copying him with this idea I had before I found his book. So I thought it was still worthwhile doing.
Mm-hmm. One of to me, the most fascinating aspect of it, beyond each of the people you profile and the jobs they do, is your own transformation in the narrative. I mean, the way you manage to put yourself in the narrative without meing it, and it's such a tightrope to walk to keep it from being all about you in moments that you're undergoing, what appears to be a significant transformation in who you are. How tough was that balance for you? And how much do the editors, have to come in with hey, either tone this down or, hey, tell us a little more about what's going on in your head when you're doing this?
There was a lot from my editors about how we want more of you. More of you.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking you underplayed it and they wanted more, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the version you've read, there's more of me in that than there was in the version they originally got. But I think they still wanted more of me. And I have an allergy to millennial memoirs. Yeah. And I thought the whole point of this book is it's not about me. I got involved emotionally in an unexpected way, and I want to talk about that. But what I think doesn't really matter. It's not the whole point of this book, and I talk about that in the afterword, how I'm not here to tell you how to think. I just want to present the truth and what I saw to you, and you can make your own mind up. There were a few edits, and I didn't change the book when I saw them. It was like they were asking, how are we supposed to feel about this, when I had stated something factually, and I just thought it was better to let it hang. I don't know, maybe you disagree.
No, that's what I found. It's why one of the many reasons why I enjoyed the book so much was that there was a person in it, but it wasn't all about the person. You manage that balance, like I say, and it's really, there's so many things that are left to our, emotional interpretation of what some of these things are going to do to us individually when we see them, or, why we avoid seeing them. It's in the introduction of this one, I will gush effusively about that. I just don't want to make your head swollen or get you uncomfortable about, how much I enjoyed it for that reason.
It's kind of fascinating now that the book is out there. It's been out in the UK since late March, and we're now recording this in August. So it's had a little while of being out there, but now that Americans have got their hands on the advanced reader copies, I'm seeing more reviews turn up on Goodreads. And I know authors are not supposed to look, but I cannot help myself. I have a sickness now. And it's kind of fascinating seeing what people take from it. And sometimes people are write really positive reviews, and then their reasoning is they're reviewing a book I didn't write. It's not what I meant. So it is kind of a Rorschach test in terms of what people take from it. And now that I've spent the last couple of weeks doing a lot of rural radio interviews with Americans, and it's fascinating how different people latch on to different parts. And I had a guy yesterday say, can I ask you about a couple of my favorite jobs, or are you sick of talking about those ones? And I said, I could not guess which ones are your favorite ones, because everybody has said a different one. I have no idea. It's really weird, but I like it.
How do you characterize, or do you characterize yet, the UK versus US attitudes? Are they sort of broad stroke enough that you can see different attitudes, either towards death or towards the book itself?
Not really. I think the American side is more commercialized, it's more regulated in terms of the funeral industry. And I think so people see it more as a business, whereas in the UK, it's a little blurrier. You don't need to go to mortuary school to be a funeral director. So anyone can call themselves a funeral director. So you get some more strange hippie ladies with feathers in their hair saying they're a funeral director. There aren't any major differences apart from the fact that the Americans are super into embalming and may have open coffins, whereas over here, embalming, you just agree to it when you're organizing a funeral. But if you ask people what it is, no one really knows. But I don't think there's any major differences in terms of attitudes towards death. However, I do think the Americans are slightly more Christian in that, with their thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Mm. If you were to get posed in some embalming post-mortem tableau, just you with your laptop, or is there some image you have for what you'd want everybody to see you at the at the funeral?
I think the one that sums me up the most is just me having a nap. I fucking love naps. So they wouldn't have to do anything fancy for me. What about you? Have you got one?
No, again,
you mid-run.
Oh no, it'd be me with a microphone,
Okay.
Yapping away at somebody. Unfortunately, but, either that or procrastinating and just looking out the window and not actually writing.
Oh, that's a classic. Yeah,
I'm inclined to go with at least something that seems active, like doing a podcast. When you talk about the occupations and the difficulty with building those connections and reaching people, is there a missing link as far as the book goes? Is there some either occupation or person you wish you could have gotten to?
I really wanted to interview Gunther von Hagens, who does the plastinated bodies. He's got a museum in Germany, and I've been to it. It's in Berlin. Just to talk to, it was another one of those I wanted to exploit my position to go somewhere I was interested in, because he's got this sort of factory where he's got workers who help him plastinate these bodies, and it's kind of morally dubious because no one's entirely sure where he gets the bodies from. I think there was rumors they came from China, although I have seen the donation form. I wanted to talk to him as an artist, an artist who deals with dead bodies, but I kind of replaced him with Nick Reynolds, the death mask sculptor, and I think that was more meaningful.
Chapter.
Pardon?
Yeah, it's a great chapter, that one.
Oh, good.
I enjoyed. I hate to say enjoyed, but I enjoyed that piece. Yeah, what is the most inappropriate way of talking about how much people liked reading the book? Is there a? I really love the part where you see the dead baby. Is that
yeah? Well, we were just talking about Goodreads reviews. I've seen a couple of people say, "I liked the book, but she seemed to revel in the death and the dead bodies, and she seemed to actually enjoy being there." And like I said, people read their own stuff into the book, but I think people have this idea that the people who work around the dead bodies must be somber and be miserable in these jobs. And my experience of them is they really aren't. So I wasn't exactly, thrilled and happy to be in these places, but I did enjoy seeing them. I don't think I revel in dead bodies. I'm not like Elvira, Queen of the Dark. I think,
although Halloween costume that could be. I'm just kidding.
I think it's different, but it's one of those people think that you have to write about death in a certain way, and I think I'm challenging that by not putting my emotions on every angle of death. I'm just showing you what's happening. Make your mind up.
And showing I think, respect rather than reverence.
Yeah.
You display that, and it comes up, with numerous occupations like the switching the faces back in the organ donation place at the Mayo Clinic. That these people respect the dead, but it's not about, the hallowed reverence of the occupation or, the proximity to death.
They'd never get anything done if that's how they did it. They have this, they're not desensitized to any of it. They do have a detachment, but like I say in the book, it's not a cold one. It's something different. They manage to put some distance between them and what they are dealing with daily emotionally, just in order to do their job properly. Because if they were taking on the emotional baggage of everything they were doing, and if they treated everything with, religious reverence or something, they wouldn't get anything done, and the bodies would pile up.
And as you point out with the crematorium chapter, those are the guys who never get a break, and
yeah.
It weighs on them. But how about you, getting to, we'll say, quote unquote, finishing the book and revisiting it, in the UK as it gets released, revisiting it here? How has it been for you stepping back from this? You say you've stayed in touch with a number of the subjects, but are you free?
Am I free?
Yeah.
Well, I was never, apart from dealing with seeing the dead baby autopsy, and part of dealing with that was finding Claire Beasley, the bereavement midwife. And I found her. That was sort of therapeutic for me. And so I dealt with that through her. I don't have any lingering trauma, I don't think, but I am now more conscious of time, and I keep thinking of that line in Sandman where death says, you get what anyone gets, you get a lifetime. And now that I've seen tiny babies who got 2 minutes, and I've seen the bodies of old people who were 105, I think the old cliche of life's too short is true, because you don't know how long you've got. And I think the most lingering thing is I really cannot be asked having arguments on the internet with conspiracy theorists, or I just have such limited patience for bullshit that people are just doing because that's what you do. I've started saying no to a lot of things, just because I know they don't matter. I think that
was my
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go. I was going to say I had last year the 10-day stretch between making an appointment with an oncologist and actually going to the appointment and being told, oh, don't worry, you've got the best bad news. In that 10-day stretch, though, it was, okay, let's figure out how to preserve the podcast forever. Let's figure out, the last 2 or 3 people, because obviously I only had 6 months left to live.
Obviously.
Yeah. And unsubscribing from a lot of emails that I've never resubscribed to, and, just taking myself off of all the little things you would just click, delete all day long.
Yeah.
That's all gone. And
I bet
there are things that have creeped back into my life, time wasters, in certain respects. But yeah, that's, you and I approach this from very different ways. You spent sort of years methodically, working around death, and I just had the deep end of surprise.
Yeah, but it's frightening. It is like jumping into a cold pool. You had to figure out how to swim. I have been meaning to tell you that I know a scientist called Bruce Levine, who is currently trying to cure your exact kind of leukemia with cell therapy.
Like I said, I got the best bad news. I mean, honestly, that was literally the oncologist's second thing she said to me. The first thing was, are you Ashkenazi? And the fact that she's Polish and has a significant accent really worried me, because you really don't want to hear that as a Jew. But anyway, but afterwards it was, oh, don't worry. It's very treatable. It's not curable, but they're working on all these different CAR T therapies and other things. So yeah, down the line.
Yeah. I saw a talk about it. Bruce Levine did a talk. I ended up in tears. It was at a Wired Health conference in London, and I cornered him in the bar afterwards to talk to him. And he's one of those guys you go, I'd trust him with anything. He just seems really nice.
Yeah, I've got by the time it progresses, they'll probably have even better treatments for me. So, but still, it's that notion. We have the same notion that there is a time bomb. Mm-hmm. For me, it's in my blood. And for you, it's the more open-ended, this could happen, that could happen. It's going to happen at some point. But yeah, it's, again, for me, it was, hey, congratulations, you turned 50. For you, it's a bit younger to approach all this stuff. But let me ask one thing that you talk about, that the separation of the shock of death from the shock of grief in the first chapter when you're talking with the funeral director. For Jews, our whole thing is burial within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. Closed casket. We never look at the body. And this dates back to, people who were living in the desert, and therefore you don't leave bodies out because everything's going to, rot and explode. Seem healthier to you? Or does that seem like a real, from who we are now, keeping up a tradition like that, seem more of an avoidance of death? You're not going to be considered anti-Semitic no matter what you answer here.
I love your people. I love the jokes. I think for all religions, all religions are great sources of stories and architecture, and I'm not sure about the rest. For me, that would be too quick. So the woman I spoke to, she said that it was at a talk she was giving, and she said that the first dead body you see shouldn't be someone you love. And she did explain it by saying that you should be able to separate the shock of seeing death for the first time from the shock of grief. And I really think she's right, because there is too much turmoil going on in your head and in your heart when you see, well, I imagine I have not yet seen someone I love who is dead, thankfully. But she gave me the experience of being able to see a dead body and dress him for his funeral. And the overwhelming feeling I got from all of that, I found I'm not religious at all, you can probably guess, but it was as close to a religious experience as I've ever had. It was genuinely transformative, but the overwhelming thing was that seeing a dead body is absolutely anticlimactic. It was just a person, and we've built up dead bodies to be these monsters. And I think if your mother dies and you've never seen a dead body before, and they say, do you want to go into the room to say goodbye to her? you're taking a lot more into that room if you've never seen a dead body before. And I'm no psychologist, but I believe that now that I've been through that and I've seen all of these bodies, not just seen them like they're in a museum, but I've actually touched them and I've been around them, I'll be able to be more present when it happens. And also, it's sort of like putting my own oxygen mask on first. I'll be able to help my anxious, fretting sister, who won't have seen any of this. So I find it, I think it's helpful, and I believe what Poppy says. And she deals with, she's been running this funeral home. At the time I spoke to her, she'd been running it for about 6 years. So she has seen so many grieving families. And she said that after dealing with all of that, so she's got the practical experience of seeing how different people respond. But again, in my book, I don't want to tell people what to do, right, because I've read every death book there is, and so many of them tell you how you're supposed to feel. Even the death positivity movement, which I guess I'm part of, but there's a tone to a lot of it that I have a problem with. Like, you know, they're putting bunting up in the cemetery. They're holding parties in the cemetery. They're doing stand-up shows where they stick 2 fingers up at death. And I go, no, that's not what I mean. I'm not part of that. I think that you should absolutely respect this inevitable thing that you have no choice in. Telling it to get fucked isn't going to get anyone anywhere.
It reminds me, and when I saw the chapter, I didn't know if this is where it was going. When you have bereavement midwife, it put me in mind of the movie The New Age from the early 90s. Peter Weller and Judi Davis as a couple of hip, not wealthy, although they were wealthy. And so they just keep kind of coasting on that. But there's a death doula scene where someone's dying and everybody's, gathered around and they're assisted suicide basically. But, that's where I going into the chapter, seeing the table of contents, I thought, oh, that's going to be an interesting one. And then where it went turned out to be completely the opposite. And I'd say the most horrifying, but, heartrending and yet touching chapter in the whole book, as you mentioned. But yeah, that sense of the onset of death or treating it as, it puts me in mind, and I'm prattling here, when you mentioned the difference between being anti-religious and irreligious, if you're directly, making fun of death, that's still a sign of how terrified you are of it, as opposed to what you're talking about, accepting and understanding it.
Yeah.
One of my practices after I guess it was after the diagnosis, or maybe it was in that 10-day stretch, was just piling up memoirs of the dying, like Hitchens' Mortality, Harold Brodkey's one, Jenny Diskey, and all these others. I'm like, yeah, that's probably going to be good to have on hand. I'll just, intellectual people approach their impending death. This will be wonders for me.
Your library looks like mine now.
Yeah. So as long as you got that copy of The Denial of Death from the Woody Allen movie, that's always important.
I mentioned Woody Allen at least twice in my book. I think there was a third mention that got taken out, but
yeah, well, you don't want to be canceled.
I know.
And again, as far as this book goes, there's canceled and then there's canceled, I guess.
Yeah.
That's something that did interest me particularly was and you mentioned it with Gunther von Hagens, art and death. And you cite specifically with Andy Warhol and of course you have it with the Nick Reynolds chapter with making death masks, but with Warhol, that sense in the crime scene cleaner chapter of the repetition of images of death, reducing its meaning, or at least hoping that it would reduce the meaning of it. That repetition of death imagery was somehow that it would have, some ability to get us over our fear of it.
A numbing effect.
But it doesn't really seem to do that exactly.
Some of it does. Well, going back to religion, I was brought up, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and it wasn't really until I sat down as an adult and went, every classroom I was in had a dead man hanging off a cross in it. That's weird. That's super weird. And the churches had the stages of so you get to watch him going to his death. That is strange. And going around.
It's not just death. That's torture. You're looking at a torture implement.
You're looking
for
at
a guy.
Yeah, it was torture and it was death. And they had different kinds of sculptures in every classroom, but some of them were quite gory. Like the hole in his side would be bigger in others, and there'd be more blood in others, and just really strange. So yeah, that numbing effect. I don't know if it's an original theory. I very much doubt it. But the fact that Andy Warhol was brought up a Catholic and then did all of his most horrific screen prints in repetition, there must be something in there about trying to numb himself to his fear of death. And his fear of death was massive. And I found when I was writing the book that when his father died, he was invited as a child to go see him, and he refused. So I do wonder what he would have been like had he seen his father dead. And it could have gone either way. I'm not saying that everyone who sees a dead body will come away from it like I did, but it is interesting to think about this one moment.
And you do have one or two of your subjects who explain that their, we'll say, casualness toward the dead is not a sign that they're serial killers. That this is just the job. This is not something I'm fascinated with. This is
Yeah. In fact, when I was speaking to the embalmer, he teaches embalming as well, and he gets lots of applicants, and he has to sort through the applicants and figure out who he's actually going to take on. I think he only takes on about 12 or something. And I said, do you get a lot of people who are like me, fascinated by death and everything that happens? And he said, yeah, and we kind of weed you people out. We don't want you. We want the people who want to help the living or give dignity to the death or something. We don't want the people who have some philosophical idea of death, who are trying to explore something. It really felt like he was saying, this isn't for you. And I had never considered it, but it's like he was saying, don't even think about it.
Yeah. And again, they're coming from the other side. They're the ones who have to see everybody who is quote unquote like you,
Yeah.
Was there a sense, I mean, you capture it in the book, but, going beyond it, was there a sense of being in too deep with what you were doing?
There was, but I didn't realize it until, and my favorite part of the book, I think, is the Afterword, where I talk to a former detective in South Wales called Anthony Mattick. And I was there to talk to him about his job. He was just going to be another, because I hadn't yet had a detective. And I knew that he had helped solve some famous cases in Wales, including a Welsh serial killer, and they don't have many of those. And so we were just talking, and we had Chinese down a small back street, and it was only when I was telling him about the book and what I'd been doing that he kind of looked at me like, like, whoa. And he said, you've come here to ask me about what I've seen, but you've seen all of it. And I really found that when I spoke to everybody who does these jobs, nobody ever sees all of death. They all just see their little patch. And so what I was doing was quite unusual in attempting to see all of it. And I don't think everyone is supposed to see all of it. And I found it really interesting that within each of their own patches, they all had these various boundaries that they put up for themselves, and they were very personal to them and personal to their job. And I thought the most telling one of that was that the women,
the execution. Oh, okay.
Not the execution. The women in the mortuary, the ones who are doing the autopsy, when they'll be sent bodies by the coroner their job is to find out how this person died. And sometimes that might be a suspected suicide. And so they take the body apart, they weigh all of the organs, and they literally hold the heart in their hands. But they won't read the suicide note in the coroner's report because that is too much. And I thought, like, that would be too... They get too emotionally attached to this story, and they can't afford to, because that means they can't do their job properly. Right. And everybody had a little thing like that I thought was really interesting.
I went on a date with a medical examiner once, back in my single days. She and her, was introduced to a friend who was her medical examiner partner. And that person, I took her out, and she and the other partner just would laugh over how easy it was to pick enlarged heart as a cause of death. Like they could just look at a body, like, we don't have to open this one. It's going to be enlarged heart. Well, open it. But,
yeah,
there are ones that it's very, very clear to them after a while. That's, we only had the one date, but that's,
Did you ask too many questions about what it's like to be a medical examiner?
I avoided most of it. It was only when, it was a double date at the beginning where we hung out with the other Emmy and her husband, and they were just goofing about that sort of stuff. And it was like, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, it just didn't go anywhere afterwards. And I just had I'm just going to pass on all this.
I would have done a few more dates just to ask a few more questions, but that's just me.
Yeah, at this point, I was only in my maybe 30 or so. So yeah, I was not quite thinking of death in the same light I do of the other side of 50. But the thing I wanted to ask though about the executioner one, it seemed as though that was I would say the toughest person for you to relate to, or at least his pre-death role made what he did seem more, I would say, self-justified or disassociated than all the other people you sort of interacted with. Misreading, overreading? No,
he was the trickiest interview out of the whole book to do. Not because I couldn't, I couldn't really understand everything, but it wasn't a case of not being able to relate to him. It was more everything he was saying didn't make sense chronologically. And it, he was very, very religious, and told me that God had given him that job. So if I really wanted to know anything about it, I should speak directly to God. That's what he said to me. But he didn't become religious until after he had stopped being the executioner. But even so, all of my questions about how he dealt with being the executioner, all of his answers involved God and how he was talking to God and being directed by God. And I was like, but no, you weren't. So it feels like he's kind of retroactively put a justification over that role, a religious justification, and it didn't quite fit. But I also felt like it wasn't my place to go, that sounds like bullshit to me. In case
you're lying to me about your God. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want him to go home upset, because he was a really sweet guy. Despite the fact he had killed 62 people, he was really sweet. And I'm no psychologist, but talking to him, it felt like I was talking to a man who did have some kind of PTSD and had put up all sorts of walls and borders that he wouldn't cross. And it was beyond those walls that my answers were. But he did say a couple of things that made me go, you were not okay with that job, and I don't think you're okay with it now. At the time, he was traveling the world as an abolitionist. He was giving speeches, but he said that on the morning of an execution, he couldn't look in the mirror because he didn't want to see himself as the executioner. And I thought that was very telling. And he said it just offhand, and then told me something else about Jesus. And I was like, wait, go back to that. But it was lost. It had gone up. It was like smoke. And another thing was that he never told his wife for the whole time he was the executioner. And I really latched onto that during our dinner and said, wait a second. Because if I tell my boyfriend anything huge that I'm going through, because it helps. And he said he didn't want to tell her, because whatever he was going through, he didn't want her to share that. He didn't want to put her through that as well. So he took it all on himself. So that says to me that there was something. He was feeling it more than he's revealing now. But I really couldn't get any solid answers out of him. And when I got home, I had to go through that transcript so many times to try and work out things chronologically, because it just, you can barely tell, I hope, in the piece, but it was so confused.
Right. And, it strikes me, for you, I mean, you grew up in Australia, you moved to UK, execution had been banned in both, or capital punishment was banned in both countries.
Here they like to talk about maybe bringing it back.
Yeah, well, so we had under Trump with the, let's start executing somebody every day because it'll fire up the base. But yeah, that sense of living in countries where that whole concept no longer exists. And, coming to America where it's hey, we got to execute before these drugs expire.
I know.
Is a different...
It's one of those things that makes America fascinating to people who don't live there. That and your healthcare system. We just
and the guns. Come on, the guns are not
the fun. Guns. We sit here and we watch you guys going, Jesus.
Yeah, it's bananas.
So I could not pass up the opportunity to talk to an executioner. And you may have noticed in my book, I do a little bit of explaining why I'm speaking to him, because he doesn't really fit with the rest of the people who care for the dead. He was somebody who actually did the killing. But I do think of him and people who do his job as another hidden death profession, because they're traditionally anonymous, and they are anonymous now, even within prisons. So I had to jump on that.
Did you end up making any decisions about your own death plans?
No. I already I would like to be water cremated, but I already knew that from a Wired article I wrote back in 2017. Oh, yeah. But I have made different I now have different thoughts about family deaths. I'm now adamant that I will be there for the preparation and the dressing of the body, and that's one of those things where you can't, if you casually say that to somebody you've barely met, they go, what? But I think my whole book explains that. That's the only change, really.
And the other big one on the other complete other side of the equation, we'll just say the maternal longing you experienced, or at least a confused version of that comes from the scene of seeing a 2-week-old baby getting immersed in a bath. Change any of your ideas about motherhood?
Oh no, I think that's past. That was temporary.
I just have no idea, and I
yeah, I don't
seem
know.
to be okay with your boyfriend, but I wasn't going to ask. That's...
Yeah, I'm still not. I'm so unsure about babies that I think by this point I should have made my mind up. So I think that says something, and maybe I have.
For me and my wife, it was the fact that neither of us liked kids when we were kids.
Right.
And so we just figured neither of us are looking forward to raising one. So,
well, it feels like the planet will probably see out the rest of the planet's lifetime, and it feels like having babies is kind of dooming them to
I've got 3 nieces who are 22 and under, my 3 nieces, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we left this for you, but
you missed it.
Good news, we got the last pretty decent time, but yeah. So you also, and to get onto a completely different area, you narrated the audiobook for this, right?
I did, and it was very strange. It was 4 days in a recording booth, and I do radio here, but I was not prepared for 8 hours, 4 days in a row of talking, and I lost my voice on the 3rd day, and they sent me home. So I'm sure if you listen to the start of the tape and the end of the tape, it sounds like I've just become a heavy smoker. Yeah, probably the end sounds better, I would guess.
Yeah. but talk about the other thing you mentioned. Since we recorded, which I think was 2016.
Yeah, on the hottest day in the whole universe. Which, by the way, we're going through another heat wave, so I think I can only speak to you on really hot, sweaty days.
We just broke like 3 days ago, and you guys have been dealing with crazy heat in the UK for a while. In fact, a pal of mine in Japan, US based, but he's Japanese, visiting family, told me over 100 degrees right now in Japan. He's looking forward to coming back to New Jersey, which he never thought he would say, but yeah. So, and I didn't want to say that you and I had a very sweaty podcast because people would take the wrong impression from that.
It was, though. It was so sweaty.
We were dying. Those pictures I took after when we were walking down the street, I was like, I hope she forgives me. But just grotesque. But you've become a radio host. You've interviewed people in this sort of format as opposed to interviewing for pros. What has that taught you? What have you learned in terms of not just the technical, but like talking to people in this sort of format?
Learning when to shut up.
Yeah, see, that's
it's tricky. I seeing somebody's eyes when they're on live radio and they realize they've just said the thing that they are contractually not allowed to say is always funny. But it is just a case of knowing when to be quiet. Otherwise, no one can hear what anyone is saying. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as pros.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a national TV interview a year and a half ago that my whole goal, I was the person being interviewed for my day job in the pharmaceutical industry. And my whole goal was not to say this one thing because I knew it would get misinterpreted or correctly interpreted and people would freak the hell out. And luckily I managed not to say it the entire time. I was like, if they put two and two together and ask, I'll have to either say it or kind of shuffle around the question, but don't offer it up. Luckily for me, the interview finished at 12:30 on the day of the insurrection, January 6th.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I finished up today's show. I'm like, oh, thank God that's over. They'll put it up in the next day or two. This is going to be great. Turn the TV on. And I was like, wow. Yeah, I don't think that interview is going to go up for a while. Never did. I got the experience at least, so that was being on the other side of things. But
being on the other side is strange. I thought I would be, because I don't know what you're like, but it doesn't matter who I have to interview. It could be someone super famous or a relative nobody. I get so nervous,
That's the best
before.
Part. The anxiety is what makes it good.
Oh God!
The fact that you worry that much about it is what makes you do it well. That's what I've concluded. Because I get as same as you. I'm supposed to sit down with Errol Morris in a couple of weeks.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I know. We'll see if that actually comes off. But
okay.
You're the first person to hear this one, on the show. But it's the same thing when I've got someone who, you look on Twitter, they've got 47 followers. This is their first book. Whatever. I get just as worked up. Not just to make a good impression, but to make sure I'm going to get something good out of them. They're going to ask them something they've never been asked before.
Yeah, I get so nervous. And when I was getting ready to do my first interview for this book, which happened in February, I was like, maybe I won't get nervous because I'm the one doing the answering and I've already got the answers and I can't screw those up.
Yeah.
Turns out I get equally as nervous. So there is there's no way out of it. It's just who I am now. If I have to speak to a person, I get nervous.
Yeah. And that's, again, there's good anxiety and bad. The good anxiety is that you go through with it anyway.
Yeah.
The bad is you come up with excuses not to, or just, like the 3 or 4 episodes that will never air. You shut up when I ask you something. I'll tell you about those off mic too. But,
okay.
Since this book took up far more of your time than you thought it was going to, do you have a next project in mind that you can jinx by telling me about it here or not?
No, it's tumbleweeds up there. I'm still recovering from this thing. It took a lot out of me. Just in terms of, emotionally, but also it is a lot of work doing a book, and not just writing a book, but chasing down permission to quote people or text in the book. Like all of the little bullshit. The best bit of writing a book is when you send the email with your first draft. You press send, and no one has replied to it yet, so you don't know if it's terrible. And because
that's so funny, 'cause I would think that's the anxiety moment, but that's the really
that's the best bit, because you cannot do anything more. You've had the stress of trying to make that deadline. You've made it. You've sent it. They haven't had time to reply and give you a new job. So you are off the hook, and maybe it only lasts 3 days, but it's bliss. It's absolute bliss. After that, when they start doing, second draft, the buzz you get from sending the second draft in is in no way the same as that first one, because now you know the problems with the manuscript and you've tried to fix them and you're hoping that they are fixed. But that first one, there's a naive thrill.
And there's the hope, are they going to notice that I didn't fix the thing that they wanted me to fix?
Yeah.
That I sort of papered it over. That's I can imagine.
One thing that I'm kind of sad that didn't make it into the book is Tom Spurgeon, because there were various drafts of this book where I tried to make it more of a road trip, and it didn't really work. It just made it really long and unwieldy and imbalanced, because the road trip didn't really work so much in the UK, just because there isn't that much road. So the American chapters became just stretched out for it may have appeared no reason, but they would be little personal reasons to me. And one of the reasons was that we were getting from, it was after we had gone from Virginia to interview Jerry the executioner, and we were driving up to Detroit to go to the cryonics facility. The chronology of the book is a bit made up. I put it together in a way that made emotional sense, and also, there was kind of a story arc, but geographically it's a bit different. And so but they happened so close together that I was still sorting things out in my head. So it's not really a lie.
It's not portrayed as the chronology is not critical to an understanding of the book.
Yeah.
The actual chronology. Yeah.
Yeah. So between going to Virginia to see Jerry and going to Detroit to see the cryonics facility, I stayed with Tom Spurgeon, who we both love. And it was so nice, because we'd been staying in hotels, and I am so exhausted by interviews and doing them while traveling from place to place, and doing the interviews too close together because I'm too poor to buy spare days in hotels. Tom was just this little space in the middle of that where we got to talk nonsense. Stayed at his house, and he had beer waiting for us, and it was so snowy, and he took us to breakfast the next day. And weirdly, it's the only time I met Tom Spurgeon, even though I spoke to him on a regular basis for years. And I find it, so it's sad I couldn't fit him anywhere in the book except the acknowledgements, but I'm also sad I didn't get to send it to him, because he used to send me encouraging little messages asking how it was going. Yeah.
I mean, I thought of it, and I was glad to see him show up in the acknowledgments. For listeners, he died in November 2019, suddenly. But reading the book the entire time, I thought about your relationship with Tom and how much how happy he would have been to see this. We'll put it that
I hope
way.
so. I hope so.
No, he was my closest friend. I never say I was his closest friend, but largely from exactly the experience you had. I never actually went into any home where Tom lived.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know. And it's terrible, because I was reading for the guy who stood me up for the podcast, Martin Amis, a couple of years ago for his last large novel. And the final 3 chapters of that one are about, let's see, Philip Larkin's death and Amos's father's trip up to Hull for the funeral, and then Saul Bellows' death and Amos's relationship with that, and Hitchens's death and Amos being there for it. But the Kingsley Amos trip to see Larkin, to Larkin's funeral, he comes back and tells his son, I'd never been to Hull. I never saw where Philip lived. I thought he was the closest friend I had. Now I realize I didn't know him at all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I thought, thanks, Martin. You just made me feel like a heel about Tom. But
well, I can tell you that the inside of Tom's house just looked like a comic book shop.
Yeah. I saw pictures afterwards. Rebecca sent me some. I felt the terrible, terrible moment where she showed one of his bookshelves of comics and collections. And there was Mark Newgarden's book, We All Die Alone. Mm. Just sitting there in the background. I'm like, I'm not going to point this out to Rebecca, but I feel terrible that that's, of course, the one that my eye latched right onto.
Yeah.
But,
when we were there drinking his beers at midnight, because we arrived so many hours later than we thought we were going to, right. Because we had misjudged the size of America.
Everybody does that. Well, that's that line that in America, 200 years is a long time, and in England, 200 miles is a long distance.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So we had, we sort of misjudged it, but also driving through America, sometimes you see interesting things on the side of the highway and you go, well, I'm literally never coming back this way in my life. So we have to stomp around this snowy graveyard, which is what happened on the way to Tom. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, we were sitting there on his couch, and he said that it was like a family heirloom couch, and many people had died on it.
All I can think of is the flip side being on the bed at John and Judith Klute's place in Camden, knowing how many other people have slept there and or together.
Yes.
Realizing that a lot of stuff's gone on in this bed, and I'm the latest person to solo.
Yeah. I've never stayed there, but I know it.
Yeah. So, was there any thought of including photos in the book?
No.
Because I think of the thing the embalmer said to you about, I wrote it down, but we're all producing a manufactured world of some kind. You're producing a word picture, and ours involves a dramaturgy of the funeral. And
yeah.
I kind of figured that was images are not.
Well, there are
necessary.
Two reasons there are no images. One is that I was going into places where I had to swear not to take any pictures. So any photographs that I did include would be sort of, in the margins. They wouldn't be the actual thing that we were describing. They would just be nonsense. They wouldn't add anything. And the second reason is I really burned myself out with my other book, The Art of Neil Gaiman. Just trying to get images for that. There are hundreds of images in that thing, and I scanned them all myself. And I swore to myself that the next book I did would have no images.
Nice.
And it's hard enough just dealing with cover designs and trying to ward off cliche or, every death book has to look the same. So many death books in the UK have a teacup on the cover because, let's sit down and have a chat. And I had to say, please, I'm so, I think it's growing up around artists. I think I'm more affected by images than a lot of people who work in publishing, who are word people. I think I'm in both camps. So I find it really tricky. And Catholicism, yes.
It really is an image-based thing. There's I think, American Masters Warhol documentary, because he's coming from Eastern Orthodox, I think, and the Greek icon, walls with all the images, is clearly one of the big visual influences. But plus, you and I were raised with comics. I
know. It's great.
Which, yeah, I'm perfectly down. I look at my art/illustration. I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't, a fine drawing or painting. This is a cartoonist who did watercolor. That's and I'm fine doing that. But I guess last major question, based on the chapter with the autopsy, have you had ribs again, or are you pretty much sworn off since seeing ribs get broken off and
Yeah, I have not eaten ribs since that moment. When I, it's really strange seeing how much the human body just looks like a butcher shop when it's taken apart. Um, I I I couldn't really eat properly after it for a few days just because I couldn't get rid of the smell of the inside of a human person. It was just I think I ate cereal for for about a week, but I still haven't ventured anywhere near a rib. No, thank you.
Gotcha. Last real question. What are you reading?
I am reading Werner Herzog's debut novel. I think it's called The Twilight World.
Mm-hmm.
I'm halfway through it and I am unironically loving it. It's about the soldiers who didn't know the war ended and stayed in the jungle. And you don't even have to read it in Herzog's voice to enjoy it. There are passages that I think are incredibly poetic, even in a non-Herzog world. There was one about the passage of time, and obviously things about time stick out to me now more than most. And I think a lot of that has to do with how weirdly time is moving now because of the pandemic. Like it feels like, I talked to my boyfriend about, when we went to that place a couple of months ago, and it turns out it was 18 months ago. So there's some stuff in there about the passage of time in the jungle and how it moves differently. And I think it speaks to what's happening in my brain right now.
According to Audible, the audiobook is narrated by him. So, you can get the Werner Herzog version if you really need.
That would be amazing. But yeah, it is actually good rather than just, a novelty piece.
Yeah. And other books you've plotzed over in the last year or so? Anything you say, oh my God, you've got to read this, either to your boyfriend or, associated readers in your life?
I'm really into The Hidden Life of Trees. I've become a gardener during the pandemic, but learning about what's happening, underneath the soil and what's going on with trees, they're magical, and you don't really think about it when you're just walking around. But if you read The Hidden Life of Trees, it sort of warps the way you see the world now. It's like magic. What are you reading?
I read for the show largely, so it's all books for guests. The thing I'm reading extracurricularly, which is the way I will bludgeon people over the head the same way I did back in college, is Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, the 1,084-page novel he put out in 2006, which is the one Pynchon I hadn't read. It's on my Kindle for, $3.99. I thought, I'll give that a start. And now it's free. Well, I'm 800 pages in. I guess I better keep going. I just do 10, 12 pages a night. And yeah, the unfortunate thing was that I read someone else's novel in the last couple of weeks and just had this, is this person bad? Or is it just that I'm measuring it against like the biggest greatest post-war authors around? I'm not entirely, no, I think it's bad. And so, yeah, that's been my side reading, but
it's not fair to read that straight after. It's not fair on them.
Yeah, that's the, it's a weird trip for me because so much of what I read, like I say, is for the show. As you may or may not know, I do keep a list of every book I've finished since 1989 when I started college.
What?
Yeah. When I started college, I started every prose book I finished. I just wrote down. That's been going on now for 33 years.
Is it the same notebook, or do you lose them?
Now it's a spreadsheet. Which I keep in the cloud so that I can get to it, or it won't get destroyed. But yeah, it's a weird trip, kind of keeping track of things, or just seeing the books I read 10, 15 years ago, or of course the things I read in 1989 that I'm completely embarrassed about now. But yeah, it's kind of strange. I guess the other extracurricular thing was the Rachel Cusk trilogy, that outline.
I haven't read them yet.
I'm of two minds. We could talk about that off mic. We have a mutual pal, so I thought, I'll read this. Maybe we'll get connected. And now I'm like, I have no idea what I would say to this person based on prose, and I'd have to research their life too, which would be a little weird. And so, yeah. But, that's the life I live is just trying to keep up with 50 of these shows. And you get to be episode 499. So that's,
gasp.
Yeah. You're right before the big round number. It's,
it's been well done for not giving up and not getting bored.
Yeah. It's a weird trip. And it's, again, that anxiety we talked about. That's, the flip side of it is, what would I do if I didn't have this?
Yeah. Empowered by anxiety and sweat.
Right. I told, because all I can do is cite past episodes to explain my life. I told Walter Kern this many years, 2015, when I mentioned that, I had quit booze in one day and never went back. I don't really have an addictive personality. He said, no, you just haven't found the right drug yet. And I said, no, I think I have. It's anxiety. And the problem is I'm building up a tolerance. And that's unfortunately characterizing my life as we know it. So. Anyway, I'm so glad we got to spend time on this. I'm glad, however long it took, and you mentioned blowing numerous deadlines getting to this point, you finished something, because this is a really remarkable book. And if you look on Goodreads, you'll see that I gave it 5 stars, which is a very rare thing for me. I don't write reviews, but I also don't give 5s very often.
Well, but, thank you very much. I will see that next time I refresh my Goodreads.
Mash.
It's too often. It's an illness. Thank you.
But that's the real author thing. So, Hayley, thanks for coming on. If you're ever going to be out here again, not during the hottest time of the year.
But it's tradition.
I guess. We'll be out, we'll be sweaty, and or you can come out to northern New Jersey and see all the trees and their hidden life as we know it.
Yeah, and I can tell you facts that I've learned from a book and pretend that I am interesting in myself.
That's what I always tell people. If they ever spend a real amount of time with me, they'll discover that I'm far shallower than I appear on the podcast. But anyway, it's episode 499. People haven't figured it out yet. So Hayley, thanks so much for coming on, and I look forward to talking more.
Thanks for having me again. It's been fun.
And that was Hayley Campbell. Her new book, All the Living and the Dead, is out this week in the U.S. from St. Martin's Press and came out earlier this year in the U.K. from Raven Books. Like I said, I think it's a fantastic book, and I really hope it finds a wide audience, because, frankly, we could all stand to reevaluate our understanding of death and better understand the people who help carry us through it. I'll put it that way. Now, Hayley's site is hayleycampbell.com, which is HayleyCampbell.com. That's got a lot of her journalism and links to her other work, like the broadcasting stuff and other podcasts she's done. She's on Twitter as Hayley Campbell and on Instagram as Hayley Campbelly, which is Hayley Campbell with a Y on the end, all one word. There'll be links to all that in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Just let them know there's this guy out there doing these interviews with interesting, creative people every week, and that it's all free. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie or TV show or book or music or piece of theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should check out or turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me an email, send a letter, send a postcard. I love postcards. I send out postcards every day, and it's really a joyous thing. You can also leave a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go longer than that, call back, leave a second message. Also, let me know if it's cool to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. Sometimes people might have something they want to share, but I would never do that without the speaker's permission and approval first. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. My day job treats me fine. My expenses are pretty minimal, although I did run up a bunch of little expenses this week for episode 500, which I'll tell you about when that one comes out next week, which is still going to be an awesome show. Anyway, if you have money, give it to individuals or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Topato.go, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms. Sometimes people need money with healthcare. They need money for day-to-day life. They need money for artistic projects. If you can, please give. And if you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, I give to my local food bank. I give to the Poor People's Campaign. I make targeted political contributions. There are other things you can do: freedom funds, election funds, women's choice and abortion funds. There are a lot of ways you can try to help us build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.